In the remote mountains of Montana, nestled within the tranquil expanse of Ironwood Valley, life seemed to follow a predictable rhythm. The locals tended to their farms, the crisp mountain air carried the scent of pine, and the land itself appeared untouched by the chaos of the outside world. But beneath the valley's serene surface, danger lurked. When the powerful Silvestar Industries set its sights on the valley, using one of Mexico's most ruthless cartels to bully, bribe, and force the locals off their land, the community seemed poised to crumble. Families vanished overnight, barns were set ablaze, and the sheriff's department, riddled with corruption, stood by helplessly. The valley was on the verge of falling into the cartel's iron grip. But Ironwood Valley harbored a secret, a man who wasn't what he seemed. Wade Thorne, a quiet, aging rancher, lived a life of solitude on his sprawling property with his loyal German shepherd, Atlas. To his neighbors, he was just another farmer. But Wade was hiding a past forged in shadows. 30 years ago, he was one of the most feared Delta Force commanders in U.S. military history, known by his call sign, Phantom. A ghost who struck without warning and disappeared without a trace. When the cartel came knocking on Wade's door, they expected an easy conquest. They couldn't have been more wrong. Wade's tactical genius, his loyal team of old comrades, and the will of a valley full of people desperate to protect their home combined to turn Ironwood into an unbreakable fortress. But as Silvestar's motives become clear and the cartel escalates their attacks, Wade realizes this is more than just a fight for land. It's a battle for justice, freedom, and survival against overwhelming odds. The question remains, can a community of farmers and ranchers, united by courage and grit, stand against one of the deadliest cartels in the hemisphere and the corporate greed backing them? And will Wade's past, long buried under the weight of forgotten battles, be enough to save the valley? Or will it destroy everything he holds dear? The fight for Ironwood Valley is about to begin, and not everyone will make it out alive. The early morning frost crunched beneath Wade Thorne's boots as he walked the perimeter of his Montana farm. Dawn painted the sky in soft shades of amber and gold, but Wade's sharp, steel-gray eyes weren't admiring the view. His gaze swept the rugged terrain like a predator on the hunt, cataloging every shadow and sound. His German shepherd, Atlas, trotted at his side, ears perked, the tension in his movements mirroring Wade's. At 65, Wade moved with the silent precision of a man half his age, his every step deliberate. 30 years in Delta Force didn't fade with time. It etched itself into muscle memory. Civilians might see an aging rancher, a widower tending his family land. Wade knew better. This farm wasn't just home. It was a fortress. Something was wrong. Atlas growled softly, his nose twitching near a section of the muddy track leading toward the property line. Wade knelt, brushing his gloved fingers over the tire tracks embedded in the ground. They were deep, made by heavy vehicles, not the kind of trucks locals drove. His gut tightened, a feeling honed over decades of missions in places most people couldn't pronounce. He rose slowly, the morning stillness pressing against him. "Atlas, let's go," he said, his voice calm but edged with command. As they reached the farmhouse, Sarah Bennett's old pickup truck rolled up the gravel driveway. Sarah, Wade's closest neighbor and longtime friend, climbed out, her face tight with worry. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced with something Wade hadn't seen in her before: fear. "Wade," she called, her voice urgent, "did you hear about the Hendersons?" Wade wiped his hands on his jeans. "What about them?" Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel even though she was standing next to her truck. "Gone. Packed up overnight. No word to anyone. Just vanished. This morning, I saw SUVs parked at their place. Men in suits. Not local." Wade's jaw tightened. "Cartel?" She nodded. "That's what people in town are saying. They've been moving north, buying up properties. Some folks sell. The ones who don't." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Wade's mind was already racing, mapping out scenarios, calculating risks. "They approached you yet?" he asked. "Not yet," Sarah replied, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting those black SUVs to appear. "But Miller's place went last week. Same story, big money offers, then threats. A week later, his barn burned down. Wade scratched Atlas behind the ears, the shepherd's watchful eyes fixed on Sarah. You need to be careful, he said. These aren't amateurs. They're systematic, well-funded. What about you, Wade? She asked, her voice softer now. You know they'll come for your place sooner or later. Wade's lips curved into a grim smile. Let them try. That night, Wade descended into the hidden cellar beneath his barn. From the outside, it looked like any other storage space, cluttered with tools and farming equipment. But beneath a false floorboard lay a cache of weapons, tactical gear, and advanced surveillance equipment, a holdover from his Delta Force days. His old friends used to call it paranoia. Wade called it preparation. He lifted a rifle from the rack, testing the sights out of habit. Everything was in perfect condition. He'd kept it that way, despite telling himself he'd never need it again. Wade activated the monitor connected to a hidden camera network spanning his property. Dozens of feeds flickered to life, showing every angle of the farm. Through one camera, he spotted headlights in the distance, black SUVs crawling along the main road. They slowed as they passed his gate. Wade leaned forward, studying the figures inside. They weren't just scouting. They were testing. His phone buzzed. A text from an old contact in law enforcement. Cartels moving fast. 7 properties in a month. They've got bigger plans than farming. Watch your back. Wade stared at the message, his jaw clenched. If the cartel was moving into Ironwood Valley, they weren't just looking to run drugs. They were building a logistics hub, a permanent foothold. And his farm, sitting at a key junction in the valley, was the perfect prize. The next morning, the cartel made their move. 3 black SUVs pulled up to Wade's gate. 5 men stepped out, led by Felix Reyes, a polished man in an expensive suit. His smile was all charm, but his eyes were as cold as a winter storm. Mr. Thorne, Felix called, extending a hand as Wade approached. Beautiful property you've got here. Wade shook his hand, noting the man's overly firm grip, a show of dominance. Amateur. What can I do for you, gentlemen? Wade asked, his voice friendly but distant. Felix gestured toward the rolling fields. We represent an investment group. We've been acquiring properties in the valley. Expanding operations, you might say. Your land interests us. We'd like to make you an offer. Wade leaned casually against the fence post, his eyes scanning the others. 2 men by the SUVs, hands resting under their jackets, armed. 2 more edging toward the barn, pretending to admire the property. Ex-military, by their stance. Not interested in selling, Wade said simply. This land's been in my family too long. Felix's smile tightened. We're prepared to offer well above market value. $3 million cash. Money's not everything. Felix stepped closer, his voice dropping. Let me be clear, Mr. Thorne. This valley is changing. You can be part of that change, or be left behind. Wade's expression didn't flicker. Sounds like a threat? Just facts, Felix replied smoothly. Accidents happen. Stubborn old men. They tend to get hurt when they don't know what's good for them. Wade straightened, his calm demeanor sharpening. Here's another fact for you. You don't know who you're dealing with. For a moment, Felix's mask slipped, his surprise evident. He recovered quickly, handing Wade a business card. You have 24 hours to reconsider. After that, the offer becomes less generous. As the SUVs disappeared down the road, Wade stood in silence, his hands curling into fists. They thought they were dealing with an old man, an easy target. They couldn't have been more wrong. That evening, Wade made a call. Knox, he said when the line connected. It's Phantom. Time to call in that favor. A low whistle came through the phone. Been a long time, Wade. How bad is it? Cartel. Setting up shop in the valley. Need backup? Definitely. Get the team together. One last mission. You know we're not as young as we used to be. Wade smiled grimly. Neither are they. As the Montana sun dipped below the mountains, Wade began preparing for war. He wasn't just defending his land. He was sending a message. This was his home, and no one was going to take it from him. The snow-capped peaks of the Montana mountains loomed in the distance, standing sentinel over Ironwood Valley. Wade Thorne leaned against the weathered railing of his front porch, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Atlas sat at his feet, ears twitching, as if sensing the storm Wade knew was coming. Felix Reyes's visit hadn't been an empty threat. Wade had seen men like him before, arrogant, overconfident, and utterly ruthless. The cartel wanted the valley, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. But Wade had something they weren't prepared for: a team of elite operatives and a lifetime of combat experience. By the time the first member of Wade's team arrived, the chill of evening had settled over the valley. A black pickup truck pulled into the driveway, and Knox stepped out, his sniper's build as lean and wiry as ever. "Phantom," Knox said, his southern drawl unchanged by the years. "Knox," Wade replied with a firm handshake. "Glad you came." "Wouldn't miss it," Knox said, glancing around. "Nice place. Quiet. Shame about the company you've got these days." "They'll regret stopping by," Wade said. "You bring the hardware?" Knox tapped the rifle case slung over his shoulder. "Brought something special. Thought you'd appreciate it. Let's get you set up." Over the next 2 days, the rest of the team trickled in. Cyrus arrived in a dusty Jeep, grinning as he unloaded crates of explosives from the back. "Wade," Cyrus called, pulling a detonator from his jacket and twirling it like a toy. "Been too long. Thought you retired." "I did," Wade said. "They didn't get the memo." "Well," Cyrus said with a mischievous grin, "I've been itching to blow something up." Perfect timing. Zane was next, pulling up in a rusted station wagon that looked out of place for someone with his tech-savvy reputation. Inside were crates of advanced communication equipment, laptops, and even a satellite uplink. "Wade," Zane said, adjusting his glasses as he stepped out. "You know I prefer fighting wars from behind a keyboard these days." "Then you're in the right place," Wade replied. "We'll need every bit of intel you can pull." Finally, Nash, the team's medic, arrived in an old ambulance he'd converted into a mobile clinic. He stepped out, his medical bag slung over one shoulder. "Wade," Nash said, his voice steady. "You call, I come. Simple as that." "Glad to have you," Wade said. "Let's keep it that way. I've seen enough blood for one lifetime." With the team assembled, the real work began. Inside the barn, Wade spread a detailed map of the valley across his workbench. Red marks indicated properties the cartel had already taken, while blue marks highlighted potential targets. His farm sat at a strategic junction, controlling access to 3 major routes. "The valley's the perfect distribution hub," Wade explained. "Isolated properties, light law enforcement, and a direct route to the interstate. They're setting up for the long haul." "What about the locals?" Knox asked. "Terrified," Wade said. "Most are packing up and leaving. The ones who stay are either too stubborn or too scared to admit what's happening." "Then we give them a reason to stay," Nash said. "Make them believe this place is worth fighting for." As the team began fortifying the farm, Wade took a moment to speak with Sarah Bennett. She'd been keeping tabs on the community, quietly gathering information. "They're scared, Wade," Sarah said, sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee. "Henderson's family is gone. Miller's barn is still smoking. People think it's just a matter of time before the cartel takes everything." "They won't," Wade said firmly. "They might, unless you let me help," Sarah said, her tone sharp. Wade frowned. "You've already done enough." Sarah hesitated, then set her coffee down. "I wasn't always a schoolteacher, Wade. Before that, I worked for the CIA." Wade's eyes narrowed. "You're serious?" She nodded. "Field agent. Mostly low-level ops, but I know how to handle myself. I left after a mission went sideways. Thought I could build a quiet life here. Guess we've both got skeletons," Wade said. "You're not in this alone," Sarah said. "Let me help." After a long pause, Wade nodded. "All right, but if you're in, you're all in. No halfway." Sarah smiled. "You'll see, Wade. I'm not the one you need to worry about." Meanwhile, Zane intercepted a cartel communication, confirming Wade's suspicions. "They're not just here for the land," Zane said, sitting at his makeshift command center in the barn. "They know about the underground facility." "How?" Wade asked, leaning over Zane's shoulder. "Satellite imaging, maybe," Zane said. "Or a leak." Knox crossed his arms. "You think they've got a mole?" Wade's jaw tightened. "We'll find out soon enough. For now, we assume they know everything." The cartel struck again that night. Wade was woken by Atlas's growl, low and menacing. Through the window, he saw movement near the barn. He grabbed his rifle and signaled to Knox, who was already in position in the north tower. "Two vehicles," Knox whispered over the radio. "For men. Looks like they're planting something." "Explosives," Cyrus guessed. "Standard scare tactic. Let's give them a scare of their own," Wade said. The team moved with surgical precision, surrounding the intruders without making a sound. Knox took the first shot, a warning round that shattered the windshield of one of the trucks. "Move and you're dead," Wade called, stepping into the light with his rifle trained on the group. The intruders froze, their hands in the air. One of them smirked. "You think this changes anything? The cartel's coming. You can't stop it." Wade stepped closer, his voice low and calm. "Let me tell you something. You came to the wrong valley, and the wrong man." After the intruders were subdued and turned over to the sheriff, Wade gathered his team in the barn. "We've got a problem," Wade said. "Someone tipped them off about the facility. They knew exactly where to look." Knox frowned. "You think it's one of us?" Wade looked around the room, his expression grim. "I don't know, but until we figure it out, trust no one." The air was heavy with tension as the team prepared for the next move. They weren't just fighting a cartel anymore. They were fighting the shadows within their own ranks. And the shadows were closing in. The cartel didn't wait long to escalate. By sunrise, Wade's team was already back at work fortifying the farm. Every fence line, ridge, and hidden choke point became part of a layered defense system. Wade's decades of asymmetric warfare training turned the property into something no outsider could breach without paying dearly. But Wade knew preparation alone wouldn't win the war. The cartel's boldness the night before confirmed that they weren't just probing anymore. They were preparing to strike. As the team worked, Zane intercepted more cartel communications. Seated at his makeshift tech station, the faint hum of machinery filled the barn as he scrolled through encrypted feeds. "They're moving faster than we expected," Zane said, adjusting his glasses. "They've got teams scouting 3 more properties. Looks like they're setting up supply routes into the valley." Wade leaned over the screen, studying the map Zane had marked. "Which properties?" Zane pointed to 3 red dots on the digital map. "Miller's Farm, the old Harrell place, and one of the Hendersons' empty lots. They're consolidating control over the eastern valley." Knox, perched nearby cleaning his rifle, let out a low whistle. "They're locking the valley down. We don't act soon, we'll be fighting uphill." Wade straightened. "Then we don't let it get that far." That evening, the team split up to disrupt the cartel's growing presence. Knox took up position on a ridge overlooking the Harrell property. Through his high-powered scope, he spotted 2 black SUVs and a half-dozen men unloading crates. "Got movement," Knox reported over the comms. "Crates look heavy. Weapons, maybe?" Wade's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Wait for my signal. Let's see how much they're willing to commit." Knox waited, his breathing steady, until one of the men signaled to the others and opened a crate. Inside were several compact drones, sleek and outfitted with explosive payloads. Knox's voice was tight. "They're not playing around. These aren't hobby drones." Wade processed the information quickly. "Take the shot, Knox. We can't let them deploy those." Knox's rifle cracked in the still night air, and the man holding the drone dropped instantly. Chaos erupted below as the cartel scrambled for cover, but Knox's precision shots kept them pinned down until Cyrus detonated a nearby trap, a carefully placed set of explosives designed to cut off their escape route. The cartel retreated, abandoning the property, but the team knew it was only a temporary victory. Back at the farm, Wade's team regrouped to assess the situation. "They're not just setting up supply routes," Zane said, pacing as he scrolled through intercepted messages. "They're preparing for something bigger. Full-scale occupation, maybe." "They've got the manpower," Nash added. "And now we know they've got tech, too. Those drones weren't off the shelf. Someone's funding them." Wade frowned. The cartel doesn't usually operate this way. Someone's pulling strings behind the scenes. The next day, the cartel struck back harder than Wade anticipated. Just after dawn, a loud hum filled the air. Wade stepped outside and shielded his eyes against the rising sun. Overhead, a swarm of drones approached, their sleek forms reflecting the light. "Drones incoming!" Wade shouted. running for the barn. Zane was already at his station, jamming frequencies and trying to intercept their signals. "They're on a closed circuit," he said, typing furiously. "Whoever's controlling these knows their stuff." The drones descended on the farm, dropping small explosives. The first hit the northern perimeter, blowing apart a section of fencing. Another struck the barn roof, sending shards of wood flying. "Knox, take them down," Wade ordered. From his position in the north tower, Knox opened fire. His first shot clipped a drone, sending it spiraling to the ground in a fiery crash. One by one, he picked them off, but the swarm was relentless. Cyrus grabbed a launcher from the weapons cache and aimed at the largest cluster of drones. The rocket streaked into the air, exploding mid-flight and taking out several in one go. Inside the farmhouse, Nash worked quickly to stabilize Atlas, who'd been grazed by shrapnel. The dog whined softly, but Nash's steady hands kept him calm. Finally, Zane broke through the cartel signal. "I've got them," he shouted. With a few keystrokes, he sent a counter-signal, forcing the remaining drones to crash into each other or the ground. When the dust settled, Wade surveyed the damage. His barn was partially destroyed, several traps had been triggered prematurely, and a good section of his perimeter fencing was gone. "This was a test," Wade said grimly. "They wanted to see how we'd respond." The team worked late into the night repairing the damage, but the air was heavy with tension. As they worked, Sarah arrived with news from the town. "They hit the Bennett's place," she said, her voice tight. "Burned the barn down. Nobody was hurt, but they left a message." She handed Wade a piece of scorched wood with the words, "Leave or burn," scrawled across it in spray paint. Wade's jaw tightened as he stared at the words. "They're trying to scare us. Make us fold." "They're not just scaring people," Sarah said. "They're buying people off. Sheriff Cooper told me a few deputies have been seen meeting with cartel men in town." Cyrus slammed a wrench onto the workbench. "Great. Corrupt cops, drones, and half the valley too scared to fight back. What's next?" Wade didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the map, his mind working through scenarios. Finally, he spoke. "We can't just defend the farm. If we wait for them to come to us, we lose. We take the fight to them." The next morning, Wade and his team launched a series of coordinated strikes on cartel assets. Knox provided overwatch as Cyrus rigged explosive traps near one of their staging grounds. Zane spread false intel through cartel channels, tricking them into deploying resources to the wrong locations. At the same time, Sarah met with locals, rallying them to the cause. She convinced the Hendersons, the Millers, and several other families to stay and fight, teaching them how to spot cartel scouts and report suspicious activity. By nightfall, the team had crippled the cartel's supply lines and forced them to retreat from several key properties. But the victory was bittersweet. As the team regrouped at the farm, Wade received a call from Sheriff Cooper. "We've got a problem," Cooper said. "Some suits from the FBI showed up asking about the valley. They're sniffing around your place." Wade's grip on the phone tightened. "What do they want?" "Hard to say," Cooper replied, "but they're not here to help." Wade ended the call and turned to the team. "We've got company." Before anyone could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching filled the air. Wade grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. 3 black SUVs were heading up the driveway. Only this time, they weren't cartel. "They're early," Wade muttered. "Who?" Sarah asked. "FBI," Wade said grimly. "And they're not here to play nice." The sound of crunching gravel announced the arrival of the black SUVs at Wade's farmhouse. Wade stood on the porch, rifle slung over his shoulder, his sharp eyes scanning the vehicles for details. The markings were official, but something about them felt wrong. Too clean, too polished, like someone trying too hard to look legitimate. The lead SUV's door opened, and a man in a tailored suit stepped out, flanked by 2 agents in tactical gear. He adjusted his sunglasses, surveying Wade and the farm with calculated indifference. "Mr. Thorne," the man said, flashing a badge. "Agent Grayson, FBI. We need to ask you a few questions." "Questions about what?" Wade replied, keeping his tone calm. Grayson's gaze swept across the property. "We've been tracking cartel activity in this valley. Your farm's come up more than once. Mind if we come in?" Wade didn't move. "I do." Actually, you've got questions, you can ask them right here. Grayson smirked but didn't push. Fair enough. We're investigating reports of heavy weapons fire, unexplained explosions, and an uptick in cartel interest in this area. I'd hate to think a quiet farmer like you is involved in anything unsavory. Wade met Grayson's gaze evenly. I defend my property, Agent. That's not unsavory. That's American. Grayson's smirk faded. Let's hope it stays that way. As the SUVs pulled away, Sarah stepped onto the porch, her expression tight. They're not just FBI, are they? No, Wade said, watching the dust trail fade into the distance. They're bought and paid for. Cartels using them to apply pressure. Then we've got a bigger problem, Sarah said, because people in town are starting to lose faith. They don't think they can win this fight. Wade's jaw tightened. Then we give them something to believe in. That evening, Wade gathered the remaining families from the valley at the old church. The mood was somber, the fear in the room palpable. Families whispered about the cartel's power, about the burned barns and missing neighbors. Wade stood at the front, his presence commanding. He wasn't one for speeches, but he knew this was a moment that called for more than plans and tactics. It called for resolve. I know what you're thinking, Wade began, his voice steady, that it's too late, that the cartel's too big, too powerful. But let me tell you something. I've faced worse. And so have you. The room fell silent. This valley is our home, Wade continued. And no one, no cartel, no corrupt agent, no outsider, has the right to take it from us. But we can't just wait for someone else to fix this. We have to fight for it ourselves. A man in the back, Bill Henderson, stood up. We're farmers, Wade, not soldiers. What chance do we have? You don't have to be soldiers, Wade replied. You just have to know your land, your tools, and your neighbors. And I can teach you the rest. The next morning, the transformation began. Wade and his team started training the community under the guise of a community watch program. Knox set up a shooting range on his property, teaching locals how to handle rifles and shotguns with precision. It's not about firing the most bullets, he told them. It's about hitting what matters. Cyrus worked with the farmers to rig their properties with non-lethal traps, tripwires, noisemakers, and carefully concealed barriers. The goal isn't to kill them, Cyrus explained. It's to slow them down, confuse them, and give you time to escape or call for help. Sarah taught the women and older children how to communicate discreetly using hand signals, radios, and coded messages. She showed them how to track movements without being seen, turning the valley into a web of eyes and ears. Zane created a surveillance network, installing hidden cameras and motion sensors throughout the valley. The feeds connected to a central command post in Wade's barn, giving them real-time intel on every movement. The first real test of their efforts came 2 days later. Sarah spotted 2 black SUVs cruising slowly through the valley, stopping at several properties to take photos and ask questions. She sent out a discreet alert over the network. Within minutes, farmers and ranchers found reasons to be outside, repairing fences, herding cattle, and working in their fields. They watched the vehicles without making it obvious, noting license plates and faces. Bill Henderson and 2 other ranchers intercepted the SUVs near the Harrell property, blocking the road with their trucks. You folks lost? Bill asked, his tone casual but firm. The driver, a man in a cheap suit, forced a smile. Just admiring the scenery. Beautiful place you've got here. Sure is, Bill said. But you're on private property. Best you move along. The SUVs left without incident, but Wade's team monitored them all the way to the highway. That's how we win, Wade told the group that night. By working together. By making this valley more trouble than it's worth. But the cartel wasn't backing down. That night, Zane intercepted a chilling message. They're mobilizing, he said, his face pale as he read the decrypted text. They're bringing in more men. Heavy weapons. Full assault planned for tomorrow night. Wade gathered the team in the barn. This is it, he said. They're coming in force. We've got one night to prepare. Knox leaned back against the wall, his sniper rifle in hand. Good, he said. Let's give them a welcome they'll never forget. The team worked through the night, fortifying key positions and setting traps. Cyrus rigged explosives along the main road, while Zane monitored cartel communications for updates. Wade walked the property with Atlas at his side, inspecting every line of defense. He stopped at Sarah's house, where she was organizing a group of women and older children. "You ready?" Wade asked. "Ready as we'll ever be," Sarah said. "We're not running, Wade." Wade nodded. "Good. Because this valley needs you." When the cartel arrived, they came with everything they had. A convoy of trucks, armed men, and even a technical outfitted with a mounted machine gun. The first vehicle triggered Cyrus's traps, an explosion flipping it onto its side and blocking the road. Gunfire erupted as Knox took out the machine gunner from his sniper nest, while the farmers used their new skills to pin down the advancing cartel forces. Wade moved like a ghost through the chaos, taking out cartel soldiers with ruthless precision. Atlas stayed close, alerting him to threats before they could strike. Despite their superior numbers, the cartel quickly found themselves outmaneuvered. The locals fought with determination, using their knowledge of the terrain to stay one step ahead. When the dust settled, the cartel was in retreat. They'd lost half their men, and the valley remained intact. Back at the farm, the community gathered to celebrate their victory. For the first time in weeks, there was laughter, relief, and hope. Wade stood at the edge of the gathering, watching as the townsfolk began to believe in themselves again. Sarah joined him, a small smile on her face. "They're not just fighting for their homes anymore," she said. "They're fighting for each other." Wade nodded. "And that's how we win." But even as the valley celebrated, Wade couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The air was still heavy with the tension of the previous night's battle. Smoke from the cartel's burning vehicles lingered in the valley as the morning sun rose over Ironwood. Wade Thorne stood on the ridge overlooking his land, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. His team had won the first real fight, but Wade knew better than to celebrate too soon. The cartel had retreated, but it wasn't a sign of defeat. It was a regrouping. Wade had spent his life studying enemies like this, and he knew their next move would be bigger, smarter, and deadlier. Back at the farmhouse, the team gathered around the workbench, where Zane had spread out a map of the valley, now marked with red pins to indicate cartel movement. "They're pulling back to a staging area outside the valley," Zane reported, typing furiously at his laptop. "They've stopped broadcasting on their usual channels, but I intercepted something on a private network. They're bringing in reinforcements, more men, heavier weapons, and at least one technical with an autocannon." "An autocannon?" Cyrus whistled. "They're not just looking to take the valley, they're looking to level it." Knox adjusted the scope on his rifle. "Let them bring it. I've got the range to handle anything they roll in." Wade crossed his arms, his expression grim. "This isn't just about firepower. They're going to hit us with everything: force, tactics, and fear. And if they succeed, this valley's gone." Sarah stepped into the barn, her arms crossed. "So what's the plan?" Wade looked at his team. "We don't wait for them to come to us. We hit them first. Take out their staging area, disrupt their supply lines, and remind them why this valley isn't worth the trouble." The plan was simple but bold: a midnight raid on the cartel's staging ground. Zane had pinpointed its location, a secluded ranch on the outskirts of the valley. From satellite images, it looked heavily fortified, with armed guards patrolling the perimeter and several vehicles parked in the open. "We'll need to move fast and quiet," Wade said. "Take out their comms, disable their vehicles, and leave them scrambling." "What about the autocannon?" Nash asked. Wade glanced at Cyrus, who was already grinning. "That's where you come in." Cyrus patted the satchel of explosives by his side. "Don't worry. I've got a surprise for them." As the team geared up, Sarah pulled Wade aside. "You sure about this?" she asked. "Taking the fight to them is risky." "It's not a choice," Wade said. "If we let them regroup, they'll roll over us. We have to keep them off balance." Sarah hesitated. "There's something else. I found a connection between the cartel and a multinational corporation, Silvestar Industries. They've been funding the cartel's expansion into this region, but I can't figure out why." Wade frowned. "Silvestar? I've heard that name before. Whatever they're after, it's tied to this valley," Sarah said. "And it's bigger than just smuggling routes." Wade nodded. "We'll deal with Silvestar after we deal with the cartel, one fight at a time." That night, the team moved like shadows through the valley. Wade led the way, his movements silent and precise. Atlas stayed at his side, his ears twitching as he sniffed the air. Knox took up position on a ridge overlooking the cartel's staging ground. Through his scope, he spotted at least a dozen men patrolling the property, with more gathered near the vehicles. "Looks like a full house," Knox reported over the comms. "Ready when you are." "Cyrus, you're up," Wade said. Cyrus grinned as he crept toward the vehicles, staying low and using the shadows for cover. He planted explosives on the technical with the autocannon, careful to avoid detection. "Charges set," Cyrus whispered. "Let's make some noise." Wade gave the signal, and Cyrus detonated the first charge. The explosion rocked the staging ground, flipping the technical and sending debris flying. Chaos erupted as cartel soldiers scrambled to respond. Knox's rifle cracked, taking out the lights and plunging the area into darkness. Wade and Sarah moved in from the east, their suppressed rifles cutting through the chaos. Zane jammed the cartel's communications, leaving them unable to coordinate their defense. By the time the cartel realized what was happening, it was too late. Their vehicles were destroyed, their comms were down, and their men were scattered. The raid was a success, but it came at a cost. As the team regrouped, Wade noticed Atlas growling at the tree line. A figure stepped into view, Riley, one of Wade's former teammates. "Riley?" Wade said, lowering his weapon. "What the hell are you doing here?" Riley raised his hands, his expression conflicted. "I'm not here to fight you, Wade. I came to warn you." "Warn me about what?" Wade asked, his voice cold. "The Shadow," Riley said. "He's coming for you." Riley revealed that the cartel's leader, a man known only as the Shadow, had a personal vendetta against Wade. Years ago, during a covert mission, Wade had taken out the Shadow's brother, a high-ranking cartel member. Now, the Shadow wanted revenge. "He's not just sending his men," Riley said. "He's coming himself, and he's bringing Los Fantasmas, his personal kill squad." Wade's team exchanged uneasy glances. They'd heard of Los Fantasmas before, former Special Forces operatives turned mercenaries, known for their brutal efficiency. "Why are you telling us this?" Wade asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Riley hesitated. "Because I owe you, Wade. You saved my life once. And because I know the Shadow won't stop until he gets what he wants." "What does he want?" Sarah asked. Riley glanced at Wade. "He wants him dead." Back at the farm, Wade and his team prepared for the inevitable showdown. The cartel was wounded but not defeated, and the Shadow's arrival would be the ultimate test of their strength and resolve. "We're outnumbered and outgunned," Knox said. "So what's the play?" "We use what we have," Wade said. "The land, the traps, the people. And we make them regret stepping foot in this valley." "Sounds like a suicide mission," Nash muttered. Wade looked at his team, his voice steady. "We've faced worse. We'll face this together." As the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, Wade stood at the edge of his property, Atlas at his side. In the distance, he saw dust rising on the road. The Shadow was coming. The morning air was eerily still, the kind of quiet that signaled a storm. Wade Thorne stood at the edge of his property, his weathered face calm but his sharp eyes fixed on the horizon. Dust rose in the distance, faint but unmistakable, vehicles, and not just a few. The Shadow was on his way, bringing death with him. Wade turned and walked back to the barn, where his team waited. The tension in the air was thick, unspoken but understood by every man and woman there. They weren't just defending a farm anymore. They were defending an entire valley and their lives. "Zane, report," Wade said as he entered. Zane was hunched over his laptop, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "I've intercepted their comms. They're close, about 30 minutes out. Convoy's bigger than we thought. 5 trucks, heavily armed. They've got at least one technical with a mounted autocannon, and they're coordinating with drones." Knox, sitting in the corner cleaning his sniper rifle, let out a low whistle. "They're not messing around this time. They've got Los Fantasmas with them," Zane added grimly. "The Shadow's personal kill squad. I count at least a dozen operators with advanced training. This isn't just muscle. They're ex-special forces." Wade nodded, his face betraying no emotion. "Good. Let them bring their best." "Cyrus," he continued, turning to the demolitions expert, Are the traps ready? Everything's set, Cyrus replied, a gleam of excitement in his eyes. Explosives on the main road, directional charges along the south ridge, and a few surprises near the barn. If they come, they'll regret it. Wade looked at his team, his gaze steady. This is it. They're not just here to take the farm. They're here to finish us. If anyone wants to walk away, now's the time. No one moved. Knox chambered a round in his rifle. We're with you, Phantom. Always. The battle began before the cartel even reached the farm. As the convoy approached the main road leading into the valley, the first truck hit a buried explosive. The blast flipped the vehicle onto its side, sending flames and debris into the air. Chaos erupted as the cartel's soldiers scrambled to regroup. Wade watched through binoculars from his vantage point on a hill, his team spread out across the property. They're adjusting, Zane said over the comms. Looks like they're sending the technical up the north road. Knox, you've got the technical, Wade ordered. On it, Knox replied. From his hidden sniper nest, Knox lined up his shot. The technical's autocannon was a beast, tearing through anything in its path, but its operator made a mistake, stopping to scan the area. Knox's rifle cracked, and the gunner dropped. A second shot took out the driver, and the vehicle veered off the road, crashing into a ditch. Technical's down, Knox reported. The shadow wasn't deterred. Through the comms Zane had hacked, Wade could hear him barking orders in calm, measured Spanish. Focus on the perimeter. Flank from the south and the east. Push them back to the farmhouse. No one leaves alive. They're splitting up, Zane said, sending 2 teams around the south ridge. Looks like they're avoiding the main road. Cyrus, Wade said, time to light them up. Cyrus grinned as he detonated the directional charges. Explosions rippled along the ridge, sending a wave of cartel soldiers scrambling for cover. Wade and Sarah moved in from the flank, taking down the survivors with precise shots. But the cartel wasn't retreating. They were probing, testing the defenses. Inside the farmhouse, Nash worked quickly to stabilize one of the locals who'd been injured during the initial attack. A rancher named Tommy had taken a bullet to the leg, and blood seeped through the makeshift bandage. You'll be fine, Nash said, his voice calm. Just keep pressure on it. Tommy nodded, wincing. I'm not leaving. This is my home. Nash gave him a small smile. Then fight for it. The tide of the battle shifted when the drones arrived. Sleek and deadly, they hovered in the air, scanning the property for targets. One of them dropped an explosive near the barn, blowing apart a section of the wall and sending Cyrus sprawling. I'm fine, Cyrus shouted, coughing as he climbed to his feet. Just rattled. Zane worked furiously at his laptop, trying to jam the drone's signals. These aren't standard drones, he said. They're military grade. Someone's funding them. Silvestar, Sarah muttered. Wade's voice cut through the comms. Zane, can you take them out? Working on it, Zane replied. The next drone made a pass, its camera locking onto the farmhouse. Before it could drop its payload, Knox took the shot, his sniper rifle cracking like thunder. The drone exploded midair, raining debris onto the field. That's one, Knox said. How many more? Too many, Zane muttered. As the battle raged, Riley, Wade's former teammate, revealed his true colors. Under the guise of helping defend the farm, he sabotaged one of the traps Cyrus had set, creating an opening for the cartel to push forward. Wade confronted Riley in the barn. You tipped them off, didn't you? Riley's face was a mixture of guilt and defiance. You don't understand, Wade. The Shadow gave me no choice. He would have killed my family. You could have told me, Wade said, his voice low and cold. We could have protected them. Riley hesitated, then dropped his gaze. It's too late for that now. Before Wade could respond, gunfire erupted outside. Riley looked at him, desperation in his eyes. Let me fix this. Without waiting for a response, Riley ran toward the south ridge, where a group of cartel soldiers was advancing. Riley's betrayal turned into a moment of redemption. Using a rifle he'd hidden earlier, he provided cover fire for Sarah and Zane, allowing them to retreat to safer ground. But his redemption came at a cost. A cartel soldier spotted him and fired. Riley collapsed, clutching his chest as blood seeped through his fingers. Wade reached Riley moments later, dropping to his knees beside his fallen teammate. "I'm sorry," Riley whispered, his voice weak. "I should have told you." Wade's expression softened. "You did what you could." "Stop them," Riley said, his voice fading. "Finish this." Riley's hand went limp, and Wade closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then he rose, his face a mask of determination. The final wave came just before sunset. The Shadow himself led the charge, his presence a rallying point for his men. Clad in black, tactical gear, he moved like a predator, his sharp commands cutting through the chaos. Wade and the Shadow finally came face to face near the barn. The two men circled each other, the battlefield fading into the background. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, Mr. Thorne," the Shadow said in accented English. "That's what I do," Wade replied. The fight was brutal and raw, two veterans using every ounce of their training. Wade's age showed, but his experience and resolve carried him through. Finally, with a well-placed strike, Wade disarmed the Shadow and pinned him to the ground. "It's over," Wade said, his voice cold. The Shadow smirked, blood trickling from his lip. "For now." The battle ended with the cartel in retreat, their forces decimated. Wade's team gathered near the barn, battered but alive. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "For now," Wade replied. "But this isn't the end. The cartel will regroup, and Silverstar won't stop. So what do we do?" Zane asked. Wade looked at his team, then at the valley stretching out before them. "We get ready," he said. "And next time, we finish it." The night after the battle, the valley was quiet again, but not peaceful. Fires smoldered in the distance where cartel vehicles had been destroyed, and the scent of burned metal and smoke lingered in the cold Montana air. Wade Thorne stood on the porch of his farmhouse, staring out over the scarred land, his mind racing. The cartel's defeat was only temporary. He knew they would regroup, and worse, he now understood there was something far bigger behind their relentless push for the valley. Silverstar Industries. Inside, Zane worked tirelessly at his makeshift command center. The barn-turned-war room buzzed with the faint hum of computers and radio equipment. Wade entered, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. "What do you have?" Wade asked. Zane didn't look up, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "A lot of noise, but I'm starting to connect the dots. Silverstar isn't just funding the cartel, they're deeply embedded. Financial transfers, supply shipments, logistical support, they're practically running the whole operation." "What's their end game?" Sarah asked, stepping into the room. Zane finally paused and turned his screen toward them. This valley isn't just a convenient hub for smuggling. It's sitting on a massive deposit of rare earth minerals, stuff used for everything from military tech to clean energy. Silverstar's been quietly buying up land to secure access. The cartel's just their muscle. Wade's jaw tightened. "So this isn't about drugs or territory. This is about corporate greed." "Exactly," Zane said. "And Silverstar's using the cartel to force out anyone who won't sell." Knox, leaning against the wall with his sniper rifle slung over his shoulder, shook his head. "They're not just after this valley. They're turning it into a war zone for profit. Then we're going to make it too expensive for them to stay," Wade said. The team began planning their next move. If they were going to stop the cartel and Silverstar, they had to hit them where it hurt, their infrastructure. "They've got a logistics hub just outside the valley," Zane said, pointing to a spot on the map. "It's a warehouse that looks like a regular shipping depot, but it's a front. Everything, money, weapons, supplies, flows through there. That's their weak point," Wade said. "We take it out, we cripple their operation." Sarah crossed her arms. "That's a big target, Wade. They'll be heavily fortified." "We've faced worse," Knox said with a grin. The next night, the team set out for the warehouse. They moved under the cover of darkness, their vehicles blending into the rugged terrain. Wade rode in the lead truck with Knox, Atlas sitting alert in the back seat. As they approached the depot, Zane patched into the security cameras. "They've got a dozen guards patrolling the perimeter, plus 2 more in the watchtower. There's a technical parked near the gate, but no sign of heavy reinforcements yet." "Yet," Cyrus muttered. "They'll come running the second we make noise." "That's why we hit them fast," Wade said. "In and out before they know what hit them." The team split into 3 groups. Knox took position on a ridge overlooking the depot, his sniper rifle trained on the watchtower. Cyrus and Sarah moved to the north side to plant explosives on the fuel tanks, while Wade, Zane, and Nash prepared to breach the main building. Knox's voice came over the comms. "Watchtower clear. You're good to move." Wade led his group toward the main entrance, using the shadows for cover. Zane disabled the electronic locks, and within seconds, they were inside. The warehouse was exactly what they'd expected. Rows of crates filled with weapons, ammunition, and cash. But as they moved deeper, they found something more disturbing. Files and blueprints detailing Silvestar's plans for the valley. "Wade," Sarah's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got company. Convoy heading your way. 5 vehicles." "Set the charges," Wade ordered. "We're blowing this place sky high." The first explosion ripped through the fuel tanks, sending a fireball into the night sky. The cartel guards panicked, scrambling to contain the flames. Knox's rifle cracked, picking off the reinforcements as they arrived. 3 down, he reported. More incoming. Inside the warehouse, Wade and Zane worked quickly to gather evidence. Nash secured the blueprints, while Zane copied files from the computers onto a flash drive. "Charges are set," Cyrus called. "We've got 5 minutes." The team retreated as the remaining charges detonated, collapsing the building in a fiery inferno. The cartel's logistics hub was gone, and with it, a critical piece of their operation. But the victory was short-lived. As the team regrouped at a safe house on the outskirts of the valley, Zane's laptop pinged with a new alert. "They're retaliating," he said, his voice grim. "Silvestar just sent a kill order. They've got mercenaries en route to the valley, professional contractors, not cartel muscle. And they're targeting you, Wade." Wade's face darkened. "Then they're about to learn who they're dealing with." The team fortified the valley like never before. Knox scouted new sniper nests, Cyrus rigged additional traps, and Zane expanded the surveillance network. Sarah rallied the local families, teaching them how to defend their properties and communicate discreetly. The valley had become a fortress, and the people were no longer just bystanders. They were fighters now, ready to stand their ground. 2 days later, the mercenaries arrived. They moved like a well-oiled machine, their tactics precise and disciplined. Unlike the cartel, these men were professionals, and they didn't make mistakes. The first skirmish took place on the South Ridge. Knox spotted a sniper team setting up near the tree line and took them out before they could fire a shot. "Nice try," he muttered, adjusting his scope. Cyrus detonated a series of charges that funneled the mercenaries into a kill zone, where Sarah and the locals opened fire from concealed positions. "They're good," Sarah said, ducking behind cover. "But we're better." The fighting escalated as the mercenaries pushed deeper into the valley. Wade led a small team to intercept their command vehicle, taking out the leader and disrupting their coordination. By the end of the day, the valley was littered with the remnants of the mercenaries' assault. Smoke rose from their abandoned vehicles, and the survivors retreated, leaving behind their wounded. Wade stood in the center of the battlefield, Atlas at his side. The valley had held once again, but the cost was rising. As the dust settled, Sarah approached Wade with a folder she'd recovered from the command vehicle. "You need to see this," she said, handing it to him. Inside were detailed plans for Silvestar's next move, complete takeover of the valley, with the backing of corrupt politicians and law enforcement. "They're not giving up," Sarah said. Wade's eyes hardened as he closed the folder. "Neither are we." The Montana sunrise painted Ironwood Valley in hues of gold and amber, but there was no time to appreciate the beauty. The valley, scarred by battle and haunted by the looming presence of Silvestar Industries, was preparing for its final fight. Wade Thorne stood at the highest ridge overlooking his land, binoculars in hand, scanning for signs of movement. Below him, the valley's residents were hard at work. Farmers, ranchers, and townsfolk had come together under Wade's guidance, transforming their quiet community into a fortress. Tractors became makeshift barricades, old barns were reinforced into defensive strongholds, and the valley's natural terrain was laced with traps and choke points. The message from Silvestar had been clear. They were sending everything they had. This wasn't just about the valley anymore. It was about making an example of anyone who dared to stand in their way. "Report," Wade said as he entered the barn, now fully converted into a command center. Zane sat at the heart of the operation, surrounded by screens displaying live feeds from hidden cameras and motion sensors scattered across the valley. "They're moving," Zane said. "Convoy of 8 vehicles, heavily armed. I count 3 technicals and at least 1 APC. They've got drones running recon ahead of them." Knox leaned against the wall, his sniper rifle resting beside him. "They're coming in heavy this time. No half measures." "They've learned from their mistakes," Sarah added, pointing to a satellite image Zane had pulled up. "Their formation is tighter, and they're using the terrain to their advantage. They're not giving us many opportunities to split them up." "Then we make our own opportunities," Wade said. The team gathered around the workbench, where a detailed map of the valley was laid out. "Cyrus," Wade said, pointing to a narrow pass leading into the valley. "That's our first bottleneck. You're in charge of slowing them down. Rig the pass with everything you've got." Cyrus grinned. "They'll regret taking that route." "Knox," Wade continued, "you've got the ridge overlooking the southern approach. Take out their scouts and pick off any officers you can spot." "Consider it done," Knox replied. "Zane, keep their comms scrambled. I don't want them coordinating once they're inside the valley." "You got it," Zane said. "Nash," Wade said, turning to the medic, "you're with Sarah. Set up a triage station near the church and coordinate the locals. If anyone's injured, get them out of the fight and patched up." Nash nodded. "Understood." "And me?" Sarah asked. Wade met her gaze. "You're the glue holding this place together. Keep everyone focused. They'll look to you when things get tough." Sarah smiled faintly. "No pressure, huh?" By mid-afternoon, the valley was quiet, the calm before the storm. Wade walked the perimeter, checking every trap and defensive position. He stopped by the Henderson farm, where Bill and a group of ranchers were reinforcing their fences with barbed wire and sandbags. "Everything ready?" Wade asked. Bill nodded. "We're as ready as we'll ever be." Wade clapped him on the shoulder. "Good. Stick to the plan, and we'll get through this." The first sign of the convoy was the low rumble of engines in the distance. Wade stood on the ridge with Atlas at his side, his binoculars trained on the advancing vehicles. "Here they come," he said into the radio. Cyrus's voice crackled in response. "Just a little closer." The convoy entered the pass, the narrow road forcing the vehicles into a single-file line. Cyrus waited until the lead vehicle was halfway through before detonating the charges. The explosion rocked the valley, collapsing the cliffs on either side and trapping the convoy in the pass. "First bottleneck sealed," Cyrus reported. "They're stuck?" Knox's rifle cracked, taking out the driver of the technical at the rear of the convoy. The cartel soldiers scrambled for cover, but there was nowhere to go. "They're deploying drones," Zane warned. "They're scanning for ambush positions." Wade adjusted his earpiece. "Knox, take out those drones. Cyrus, fall back to the second line." The battle intensified as the cartel pushed forward, using brute force to clear the debris blocking their path. Explosions lit up the valley as Cyrus triggered more traps, slowing their progress but not stopping them entirely. At the second defensive line, Sarah and a group of locals held their ground. Armed with rifles and shotguns, they fired from behind barricades as the cartel advanced. "Hold the line," Sarah shouted, reloading her rifle. A technical roared toward their position, its mounted gun shredding the barricades. Before it could do more damage, Knox's rifle cracked, and the gunner slumped over the weapon. "Technical neutralized," Knox reported. Despite the resistance, the cartel's forces were relentless. By nightfall, they had breached the second line of defense and were pushing toward the heart of the valley. Wade regrouped with his team at the farmhouse, his face grim. "They're not stopping," Sarah said. "We've slowed them down, but they're coming in force." "Then we make our stand here," Wade said. "This is where it ends." The final battle was chaos. The cartel threw everything they had at the farmhouse: drones, technicals, and heavily armed soldiers. The defenders fought with everything they had, using every advantage the terrain and their preparation could offer. Knox held the North Ridge, picking off targets with deadly precision. Cyrus and Zane worked together to rig last-minute traps, buying precious minutes for the defenders. Sarah coordinated the locals, ensuring no one broke formation or panicked. Wade moved through the battlefield like a ghost, taking out cartel soldiers with ruthless efficiency. Atlas stayed close, warning him of approaching threats and taking down enemies when Wade couldn't. Finally, the Shadow arrived. The cartel leader stepped out of an armored vehicle, flanked by his personal guards. He was calm, calculating, and deadly. "Wade Thorne," the Shadow called out, his voice carrying over the battlefield. "Come out and face me." Wade emerged from the shadows, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "You came all this way for nothing," he said. The Shadow smirked. "We'll see." The two men circled each other, their movements deliberate. The battle seemed to pause around them, as if the entire valley held its breath. The fight was brutal and personal. The Shadow was a skilled fighter, but Wade's experience and determination gave him the edge. Finally, with a swift, calculated strike, Wade disarmed the Shadow and pinned him to the ground. "It's over," Wade said, his voice cold. The Shadow laughed, blood trickling from his mouth. "You think this changes anything? Sylvestar will send more. They'll never stop." Wade's jaw tightened. "Then we'll be ready." By dawn, the battle was over. The cartel's forces were destroyed, and the valley was safe, for now. The locals gathered at the farmhouse, their faces weary but filled with hope. They had stood together and won. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Sarah stood beside Wade, her voice soft. "Do you think it's really over?" Wade looked out over the valley, the scars of the battle still visible but fading in the morning light. "It's never over," he said. "But as long as we stand together, this valley will always be worth fighting for."